Welcome to tonight's episode of Secular Soapbox. I'm Apostacie, and I'm joined with my amazing co-host tonight, Darante. We are welcoming Jason from Dragons and Genesis and Derek from Myth Vision as we discuss the origins of Enoch. Please remember to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell to be notified when we go live. Let's start the show. Hi, welcome back, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. We had so much fun talking about Enoch a couple months ago. We were like, let's do this again. So, yay. Thank you for coming
I'm
back.
super duper excited about this.
Yeah. And thanks, Darante, for being my co-host tonight.
I'm just going to be a fly on the wall, if you will.
Do you know much about Enoch?
I know a little bit, but nowhere near as much as these two guys in the corners of the screen. And so I am like super excited about this.
Yeah, you guys know a lot about it. So, yay.
Yay.
Yeah. How are you?
Good. Jason?
I'm good. Staying busy with work and the podcast. Just recorded another episode and dropped it a few hours ago, actually, covering the books of Micah, Nahum, and Jonah. So we have like the world's most famous big fish story.
Oh,
I
wow.
mean, every dude who goes out fishing catches a gigantic fish, but no one can top Jonah.
No, not at all. As I was preparing for tonight's show, I went on YouTube to look up some, more information about Enoch, and pretty much everything that came up was from Myth Vision or Dragons of Genesis. So you guys pretty much have this area covered, it seems like. So you are the
How does
people
that
to
feel
talk
for
to.
y'all to be dominating the market right now? To be cornering that market on Enoch?
Pretty good. Now, I will say there is a lot of other material available on YouTube concerning Enoch, but if it's not from our two channels, it's probably talking about ancient aliens and how the Earth is only 6,000 years old. So you should probably stay away from it.
Yeah. I did. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I recommend Digital Hammurabi's interview with Seth L. Sanders on Enoch as well. I keep going back to that interview, and that guy is something else.
Okay. Yeah. Well, one of the videos that I did watch, even though, because I was like, well, maybe I'll expand my horizons on some other information, but they were even taking clips from your channel, Derek, and
Wow.
but giving credit Myth Vision podcast. So, yeah.
Who is this?
I don't. Well, I can look it up, but
yeah, later.
Yeah, it had 1.2 million views, and so I was like, oh, this is really good for you because it had Myth Vision. So, anyways, I thought I'd let you know that. But so for people who might not be familiar with Enoch, could you, both of you, I don't know who wants to go first, but could you provide like an overview of the historical context in which the book of Enoch was written?
Jason, I'm going to let you do your thing. And then like, if I feel like we could just add something to it, because to be very fair, so anyone has context, before I knew much of anything about Enoch, Jason and I had phone conversations. So there is a secret society of the Illuminati here. And this guy is he has a top seat in it. Of course, teasing for those who might actually take that literal. Yes. But the guy really made me go, man, it was like planted a seed. And it wasn't until months, even a year or so later, before I actually started looking into it more about calendars and this and that. And I was like, okay, let's let Jason begin, because the honor is his in light of the fact that I came after him.
Okay. Take it away, Jason.
Thank you for the kind words, Derek. Much appreciated.
Of course.
As for the historical context for the authorship of Enoch, it looks like it was definitely written in the Second Temple period. So this is after the Jews have left Babylon and gone back to Jerusalem. So this is the end of the 6th century BCE. So in the time after that, there's a lot of turmoil in and around Jerusalem because you have new priests coming in and they're kind of taking control of everything. A new temple is being built. There's all this Persian and Babylonian influence. And the next, 7 centuries is extremely chaotic for this region. And one of the things that you have is a bunch of priests who are no longer welcome in the temple. And this isn't like one group. These are dozens of groups, maybe 30 or 40 different sects of Judaism scattered all over the Dead Sea region. And they're all kind of writing their own stuff. And so around 200, 300 BCE, somewhere around there, you have some of the earliest material found, like in the Book of Watchers, that's being written by these people. And it looks like some of their stuff is being written as a response to what is becoming the Old Testament. The Torah is being compiled. A bunch of these other different books are being collected, and they're gradually sort of being gathered up. Not into what we would consider a Hebrew Bible just yet, but they're starting to coalesce. And these other groups are sort of doing their own thing. And they look at the Torah and they see that it represents a lot of things that they dislike. And so they begin writing and collecting their own groups of stories and putting that together into 5 books that are then stitched together into one big book that would become known as First Enoch. And so some of this stuff may go back to about 400 BCE. A lot of the other material comes from much later, around the same time that Daniel was written, so about 140 to 160 BCE. And some parts of it could be as late as the early Christian period. Right. So First Enoch is between 50 and 300 years before Christianity, somewhere around that period. And it's kind of difficult to pin it down, any more than that. The most conclusive dating we can get is from the Dead Sea Scrolls. We've got 4 of the 5 sections of First Enoch represented in the Qumran text. And these things look like they're from about 200 years before Christianity. But they already had multiple copies of these things. So obviously the text had been collected prior to that. So you could figure maybe another century before for some of these things. Right. And then once you get beyond that, it's really hard to tell because you could have stories floating around for a century or two before it actually finds its way into these books. And then as far as the people, these were apocalyptic Jews. This was communities of people who firmly believed that the Second Temple was completely corrupted, that the priests were illegitimate, that their practices and sacrifices had all gone horribly wrong, and that all of these practices that were being done in Jerusalem were ultimately leading to the end of the world. And some of them believed that was going to happen probably in the first few decades of the first century of the Common Era. So around the time of Jesus, that's when they believed that the end of the world was going to happen. And of course, they had different calculations for this, and even groups that were using the same calculations had different starting points for those calculations. So somewhere between about, I think the earliest was about 30 BCE, and the latest was about 100 CE. So right around, centered around the early Christian period. That's when they thought the end of the world was going to happen. And this is basically laying the groundwork for Christianity. If you don't have these apocalyptic Jews who are looking for a Messiah in this time period, you do not have Christianity. So whether or not you believe in an actual Jesus, if you don't have these groups of Jews anticipating this, then no matter who popped up, no one would have cared.
Right.
A prophet's message doesn't go anywhere if it doesn't have fertile ground.
Right.
This is the fertile ground for the seed of Christianity. And so Christianity, it either rose out of a sect like the Essenes or the Ebionites, or a sect that was so close to them as to make no difference. And these groups like the Essenes, these are the people who wrote the book of Enoch, or
Right.
the different books that became First Enoch.
Wow.
So thank you for all of that.
Yes.
One of my
Wow.
questions though is like, who are the watchers exactly?
Oh, that so before I can even answer that,
Mm-hmm.
you have to remember that everything in Enoch has multiple meanings.
Oh, okay.
If they say, look, there's a white bull, okay, yeah, it's a white bull, but it might also be a person. Okay, so everything in Enoch has multiple meanings, and sometimes it's not even two, sometimes it's 3 or 4 or 5.
Oh my God.
So the Watchers are a group of angels whose job it was to kind of keep track of things on Earth, to manage all the things that were going on planet Earth. Okay, and they had all these different angels. They had angels that moved the stars around. They were in charge of like constellations and things. They had some that moved the sun. They had some that they had storehouses, and they kept all the wind in these storehouses. And they would open up these gates in the firmament, and they would let out the wind. Okay, and rain and sleet and hail and snow, everything. It all had groups of angels to do it. Humanity had the Watchers, and this was these angels. Their sole purpose was to keep track of humanity and kind of watch over us. Okay, and this probably comes from Zoroastrianism. They had the idea of like guardian angels and stuff. That's where Christianity gets it, and so it looks like they got it from Zoroastrianism. That they got this idea of these angels that would watch over humanity from them, and they modified it. At the same time, they're also talking about kings and princes.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, everything had a double meaning. And in Enochic theology, kings and stuff, they were also divine figures. So the ruler of a nation, he wasn't just a king. He wasn't just like, some woman's son who sat on a fancy chair and had a gold hat. No, he was the earthly incarnation of a celestial figure, an angel or a sort of, lesser deity. And there may not have been much of a difference between a lesser god and an angel. That may be 2 words for the same thing.
Okay.
But even then, he was also a star. The movements of stars would tell you things about what was going on with rulers, not because of like some weird astrology, but because they believed that humans were essentially a shadow of the angels up in heaven. And so what was happening up in the heavens was being played out on earth, almost like shadow puppets. And the stars in the sky were these angels. So a king was an angel, was a star. And so if you saw like a shooting star, they thought, oh, a king just died. And the angel that is the heavenly version of that king just fell down, or it got cast down to earth because he did something wrong. Okay. And so that's where, like, you follow a star to find Jesus.
Yep.
That's what this is talking about.
Yep.
There's a star. This is Jesus. They're following, and it leads them straight to the dude. Okay. And so that's what this is. So a watcher, it's an angel who's given dominion over the world, over part of the world. It's also a star. It's also a king or a prince. In Deuteronomy 32:8, we catch a glimpse of this where the high god El Elyon divides up the world, into like 70 nations, and he gives each one of the nations to one of his sons. And the land of Israel is given to his favorite son, Yahweh. And in that, Yahweh and his 69 brothers, they are all watchers. They are all angels. And it's believed that in Enochic theology, Yahweh was just like, he was sort of like the captain of these other angels. It wouldn't be until like other groups would kind of merge him and El Elyon together to just be like the capital G God. So that's what a watcher is. It's a prince or a king. It's also an angel, and it's also a star. And they weren't all right because they believed that that the leaders in First Enoch, they sometimes call them shepherds, the people who were in charge of the world, they were doing things wrong, and that was leading to this great cataclysm. And so they were corrupt rulers, like you see all throughout the prophetic books in the Old Testament. They're these unjust kings, but they're also considered rebellious angels. It's wrong to think of them as two separate things. A rebellious angel and a corrupt king and a falling star, that's one thing according to Enochic theology.
Oh my gosh.
That's very interesting, because I was a part of more so urban charismatic circles. And even though Enoch was never mentioned, that is how the Bible was interpreted for very many. That and many of it going off of Daniel books, chapters in Daniel and chapters in Revelations, where there are the 7 stars, the 7 angels, who are the 7 angels of those 7 churches. So you do see that correlation. And so there was this idea, and you kind of see some of the forebearings of that in modern evangelicism, evangelicus, whatever, however you say that word. You see that in there with this theocratic idea that these pastors and that these spiritual leaders they're more than just pastors and spiritual leaders. They are the angels of the churches. They are the stars of the churches. And then we have that with the personality cult aspect as well. But that is very interesting, because Enoch was not introduced to me while I was a pastor. That was something I came across while deconstructing. But now hearing you explain it that way, I'm like, holy crap, that was my theology. That was how we viewed the world in a lot of ways. And so that's just, that's mind blowing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's because this is where Christianity came from. That's why Christianity was so at odds with the temple. I mean, you read about it, and Jesus, he hates the temple. His whole thing is he's going to tear the whole thing down and build a new one that gets it right. That was the dream of these people. And 300 years before Christianity, these different communities who aren't allowed in the temple are writing stories about how they want the whole thing torn down to start over. But because they're like, these people, they've led everyone astray. They've gotten it all wrong.
That makes sense. Well,
start over, reboot.
And I won't hog the mic anymore than this, but it makes sense, because as an African American, I go through a lot of fringe theologies that are very similar to that. And the African American community in America is very similar to the community that would have existed at this time in this area, a community who's living under what they would consider generational oppression, generational systematic oppression, where they've had to assimilate into and lose somewhat of their ancestral identity. And so they're fighting very hard to figure out what the truth of that identity is. And so that I can see that from a sociological perspective of how that sits very well. Yeah.
And that's why Christianity works so well. If you have a group of people who are struggling, it's so easy to sell Christianity to them, because that's the people who wrote it. That's where it came from. It comes from a victimhood identity. And even Judaism, like Second Temple Judaism, that's where it came from. It's these people who were living in Babylon, who they didn't have a home, they didn't have a temple, they didn't have a city, they didn't have a nation. It was basically a slave army being sent back to Judah. And they bring with them all these different ideas. And from consecutive defeats, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, they forged this national identity for a people that don't have a nation. And so that's why it's so difficult for like subgroups in any culture to get out of it, because it's not just it's not just a religion. It is part of your cultural and even racial identity. And I've heard that from a lot of African Americans. So like, man, I'm not a believer, but I can't leave because it would be like turning against my own people. That's how people see it. And it breaks my heart to hear that, like you have to stay in this thing because you kind of don't have a choice. And it's really tragic, but that's why, because it came from people living like that. And then in the Christian period, it really didn't get any better, because now you had this subgroup of those people who were now living under Roman oppression. And the Romans, they didn't care which sect of Judaism you were part of. They went after all of them. And at that time, Christians and Jews, they weren't separate things yet. So it was,
wow.
So that's why.
It really does appeal to people who are suffering, or who feel that they're suffering, and gives them reason for their suffering that they don't have to connect with reality per se. You get to say, I'm suffering because the world is bad. Things have gone horribly, horribly bad, which is what I believed for a long time. I'm suffering because the world is bad and there's nothing I can do about it but believe God.
And suffering basically tells you that you are on the correct path, because the path is supposed to be difficult. If you have it easy, you're on the downhill.
Exactly.
That's why. Because like these were people who didn't get to live the easy, cushy lifestyle in Jerusalem. No, they had to live out in the desert and eat locusts and stuff. They were like, man, this life sucks. And so they
got to justify your suffering.
Theology. Yeah, look. God wants us to suffer because it proves that we're right. Only the righteous can live like this. And they living this really ascetic lifestyle was what was considered right. That's why in both Enoch and Christianity, there's so many passages against wealth. The wealth, they're all corrupt and evil, That's why, because these people were all dirt poor, or it was wealthy Christians selling the message to people who were dirt poor. Because your gospel authors, they were not fishermen and shepherds. They were not. No. They were not.
We have a question which I was thinking about. Does any sect of Christianity still learn Enoch as part of their church? I can't click on it. There we go. I know that the Ethiopian church, they have it as part of their canon.
That's where the Western world first learned about it.
Okay. So how come they canonized it, but like our Bibles have not canonized it?
We don't know. That's the fun part. James Bruce, this guy in, I think, 1769, he's a Scottish explorer. He's looking for the headwaters of the Nile. And instead of like going upriver and fighting hippos and crocodiles and harsh desert, he comes down through Arabia and he goes across into Ethiopia because it's a lot greener. It's a much more forgiving environment. And he's going to cut across there, just go west, hit the Nile, and then start going upstream. And when he starts traveling across there, he realizes he's in a nation full of Christians, and no idea how they got there because the nearest Christians were all the way up in like northern Egypt. Everyone in the intervening area was either some other religion or Muslim. And so it's like, how did Christianity get here? And when did it get here? And the best we can figure is somewhere after people had kind of like started producing Bibles, but before the Muslim conquest. So about 400 to 650 AD, somewhere in that period, Christianity made its way there, probably through Arabia, because there's really no sign of Christianity in the middle of Egypt in that time period. It just doesn't exist. So they probably went down through Arabia and then crossed over and ended up in Ethiopia. And whatever group of Christians went there, they had Enoch as part of their Old Testament, and it just thrived there. And they didn't know any better. I mean, their Bibles just had Enoch, and that was that. And it was everyone else who didn't have it. And that's as far as I know, that's the best answer we have is about that time period. Someone brought it there, and no one knows who.
Interesting. Okay, so you know how, like, I learned in church, I don't know if you taught this, Darante, or if Derek, you learned this in your, church days, but I was always taught that there were, like, you could look in the Old Testament and see Jesus in the Old Testament in pretty much every book, right? You could see foreshadowing. Besides the story, or you just give the example of like the star and following the star in Enoch, are there any other sort of foreshadowings of Jesus in Enoch besides like maybe his ascending to heaven or whatever? Is there any other, foreshadowing of Jesus
in the Bible or in Enoch?
No, in Enoch. In Enochian
Well, yeah,
literature.
without a doubt. I mean, he's seated at the right hand of God. I mean, he literally goes up to heaven with the head honcho and the kind of authorities, the shepherd figure,
right?
Like that was being said. And by the way, if you go far enough back, because what I love about Jason's like got the microscope on the book and the development of it. Like my thing is to go backwards because I like to I mean, he does too. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying I like to go let's leave the Bible alone for once and just go, where did the Bible get this stuff from? I almost said the word. And and you find a shepherd king named Adapa. Anyway, I don't want to go into that yet, but and we'll probably touch on that. But and I'm sure Jason has plenty of other things because one of the things me and Jason I know he has. And I ran across this when I was looking at an early, not that early, but like an English translation of Enoch by one of these guys back in the early 20th century who was translating this stuff. And he was like, before you even read Enoch, he's like, I need to tell y'all something first. I started noticing how much of the New Testament talks about this book, like without this book being part of the New Testament, and how much overlap and themes you find. And just the theology that's there has some connection. And so being a shepherd was well established even before the biblical times. Kings were called shepherds because they're supposed to, in a metaphorical sense, take good care of their people, just like a shepherd literally takes care of their animals, their livestock. And so Jesus being called a shepherd goes in line with him being a king. And there's, as he said, multiple meanings to, they thought in really interesting ways, but like multiple meanings to things that they're saying. And so, you'll find that in the Bible. I don't know if there's, other than the fact that he goes on to live forever. It's not a direct parallel, like identical, but like Enoch is hinted at in Genesis is like walking with God and he was taken. Of course, he doesn't die there in that scene. And I'm not sure if he ever died, but there is a debate over whether or not this guy, like in certain forms of Enochian literature, if he's like died but taken by God, like and has an apotheosis, or if he never died. And I tried to wrestle with that in my documentary, in one of my documentaries, but mostly he doesn't die; he's taken. Jason probably has a million things on that.
I was just gonna say that is very, very interesting because I remember even as a young minister, I struggled to see Jesus in the Old Testament. I could not see him there the way other people said that he was there. In the scriptures they'd point me to, the context didn't read out the way that they wanted it to. And so now hearing about Enoch more in detail, it's like, that must be the missing link for this more apocalyptic Messiah, because surely there's Messiah in the Old Testament, but it's not a Messiah that looks like the one that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John describes, at least not from what I saw. Because that Messiah is more localized, more specified, does not have as much intention with taking care of the world, and is not necessarily an eternal figure, but is something that literally kind of repeats generationally. And so when I get to this place where there's a son of God who is the great shepherd, who is perfect, who is one with God, I'm like, whoa, I feel like I missed like a few chapters here, and I like to figure out where they went.
Yeah. And what's fun is if you read like the Old Testament and then you try to jump straight into the New Testament, yeah, you'd very much feel like I'm missing something. You know,
Yep.
You do,
this,
and you
this
are.
has to be a trilogy, and I'm missing part 2. What's wrong with this? Grab like
Yeah,
go
you know,
from
one thing,
Daniel
Jason,
straight into Enoch, and
I was
then
just
read the
about
New
to say,
Testament.
because Daniel pretends to be in Babylon, all right,
Yeah.
of course, and into Persia, Babylon. But like, I love what you just said there, and I think this is worth emphasizing. We were taught there's this 400 intermediate period where no literature
Yes.
on God was written, and it's like, what? Ho, what? Now we know Jubilees, Maccabees, like which
Yeah.
some of these books were already in Catholic Bibles, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Yes.
variation, but not Enoch. And Enoch just gets so freaking weird and cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And we also have to remember that Daniel is only about 200 years before Paul. You know,
Oh, wow.
like the epistles of Paul and like the Gospel of Mark is only about 2 centuries after the writing of Daniel. Daniel is not that early. Daniel is late.
Oh my gosh.
Daniel is like 2nd century BC. So yeah. But as for like,
Crazy.
so as for like seeing Jesus in Enoch, you have like, there's some weird things, you know, like Derek was saying in the, which section was that?
Him being seated at the right hand? Or?
The similitudes of Enoch. That's where you have this whole thing about it's divided into 3 sections, and a lot of it is talking about like the elect one or the Son of Man, and it's this weird like half human, half divine figure, and he's to like sit at the right hand of the high God. He's to sit in judgment over human and angels on the day of judgment, all sorts of different things. And at the end of that thing, at the end of the third part of that, this angel goes and after he gives Enoch a tour of the heavens and stuff, he melts away Enoch's skin, and Enoch turns into an angel, and it's revealed to him then, you are the Son of Man. And he's like,
Oh my God.
and, you know,
Jason,
that's
just
when
one-
Enoch then flies up at the end of his 365th year, and he is now this divine figure.
Your point about him being able to judge the angels, what I find interesting is even in the Book of Watchers, you have that hint where when he's tasked with going and giving the bad news to the angels about the judgment coming, and then the angels are begging Enoch.
Yeah.
They're begging Enoch, please go to the big man. Like, it's assumed he has a connection and he has authority in that text, which may have come after the similitudes. I'm not 100% sure on the scholarship there, but that is assumed if he's going back to head honcho upstairs. Hey, daddy, check it out. They're saying they're sorry and they mean it. And he says, hell no, they are done. And that's it.
Yeah.
No mercy.
Wow.
Literally.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, so yeah, it's sort of like the thing how, you know, in Exodus, Yahweh, he's getting ready to just smite all the Israelites during the whole golden calf incident. And Moses like, whoa, hang on.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we dial this thing back? Maybe only kill about like 10,000 of them or so, but keep, you know, let's have someone to bring home, right? You know, things like that, right? You have this, it pops up throughout, you know. You've got Abraham interceding on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, this keeps popping up. You know, the prophet, you know, telling Yahweh to just calm down. And Enoch does the same thing, but not on behalf of a bunch of humans, but on the evil angels who have just ruined the perfect creation. And later in the book,
Wow.
I believe it's in this little fragment tucked in way at the end. That's part that the scholars believe it's part of a lost book called the Book of Noah. His little intercession actually works, and some of the Watchers are forgiven and transformed back into angels and get to go back up into heaven. And what's cool is in the movie Noah from Darren Aronofsky, he actually depicts that, which I thought was really cool. That little tiny obscure passage, it's like one sentence, and it's way near the end of, I think, the last book of Enoch. It happens, and they get to go up there, and they get to, some of them are redeemed and get to go back up into heaven. And it's like, seeing that included, I thought was really cool.
I'd like to add to this. You brought up Moses, and I love the perception you gave about the golden calf and the annihilation, because as you and I both know, the competitive, it seems, and I don't know the ins and outs of this scholarship, but the competitive nature between Enoch as a celestial almost mediator, like Jesus is a mediator between heaven and earth. Enoch is a mediator. He goes up to heaven. He gets all the insights from God. He brings it back down to mortals and back down to earth where the angels are, just like Moses. And people are like, Moses? Yeah. Goes on a high mountain, which symbolizes going to heaven, gets the insights or the laws of God and the precepts of how they're supposed to live, brings them back down. And I was thinking about origin. I always tell Christians, they always want to twist your arm to try and make you become a Christian again, right? And I'm like, listen, if there was someone that I actually enjoy, like, I liked the guy and I get where he was going with it, it was Origin. Not for the sake of him cutting his balls off, but for the sake of him, not for that, but for the idea that he went on record actually doing something that most of the early Christians wouldn't, and became kind of heretical in the Christians' eyes. He said, in the end, even Satan will be forgiven and all things will be redeemed by God. So he was a universalist, which put him in a not in a good camp, but in our eyes, it's like, we could probably get along with that guy today. You know what I'm saying? Like, anyways,
I can roll with that.
Yeah. And you talk about sort of this, almost this competition between like Enoch and Moses. And that was very much on their minds. Enoch was written to be a better version of Moses.
That's right.
Moses, he's like this pretty important dude, right? He goes, he gets these people out of slavery. He performs some miracles. He leads them across the desert. He's supposed to command a rock to spout water, but he accidentally hit it with a stick instead. And Yahweh got mad and said he couldn't go into the promised land because I guess it was like a Simon Says game or something. I don't know. And ultimately he gets the people to the border, and then he goes up onto a mountain and dies. And then he just gets buried in an unmarked grave somewhere. But along the way, he does some cool stuff. He goes up onto a mountain to commune with God. His stuff, his writings are stored in the Ark of the Covenant. When he comes down from the mountain, his face is glowing, or he has horns, depending on how you want to translate the specific word.
Wait, what? I've never heard the horns.
There's like this. When he comes down, it says that like his face is shining or something. He has to hide his face so it doesn't scare people.
That I've heard.
But the word used in the original Hebrew can mean glowing or horns. So it could mean that his face is glowing or that he has horns.
Or he's horny.
So he's either glowing or horny. That's exactly where I was going with that.
Now, some people think
tracks.
And some people are like, well, maybe it meant both. That it was like he was glowing and he had horns. Now people would say, why the hell would Moses have horns? But like even in the Renaissance, you've got, I think it's Michelangelo who did not the turtle, the famous sculpture of Moses, and he's got horns on his head. And, and it wasn't meant to be like an insult.
On the horns, though, because
it was like very reverent.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
Okay.
Horns are
People,
good in the ancient world.
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
That makes
And-
because of the bull, the lamb. It's,
Right,
Well,
it's,
it's,
right,
it's a symbol of being somewhat of a divine figure. I mean,
yeah.
straight up, if you had horns, kings wore crowns. Those
Yeah.
crowns
Oh,
symbolize
yeah.
something.
Yeah.
They're a
The
sign of
two-
divinity.
yeah.
Well, the three
it's-
oldest divine archetypes are the bulls, the lions, and the snakes. Like almost across cultures, you find those horns.
Yeah.
You find those feline characteristics and those snake characteristics. So that is very interesting.
Right. And horns could also be symbolic of like the rays of the sun, which goes in line with him shining.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is whenever these Jews in the 2nd century BC were translating the Hebrew into Greek to make the Septuagint, and they got to that word, they had a choice. Do we translate it that Moses had horns or Moses' face was shining? Now, these are Jewish scribes who also speak fluent Greek. They're the ones translating this so that all the Jews in the Mediterranean world who no longer speak Hebrew but can now speak Greek can be able to read their scriptures. They they translated it as horns. And
Makes
so it's
sense.
like, what? And you look at the, this whole thing, you've got the golden calf. In some early versions of Exodus, it says that Aaron took all of this gold and he threw it into the fire and the Spirit formed it into a calf. And at the Jerusalem temple, there were these giant bronze bulls outside of the temple. Each, there was like a group of like, I think 4 of them, or no, I think it was 12. There was like 3 side by side facing each of the 4 directions, supporting a giant bowl that was full of water. And these were symbols of God. Actually, one of the names for El Elyon was Bull El. They were actually comparing him to a bull, the strength of a bull. They even compare him in the Old Testament like a dozen times to the reem, which was this gigantic bull creature the size of a mountain. The King James mistranslates it into unicorn. It's talking about a cow that's like 1,000 feet tall. Okay, this isn't a unicorn. This is this gigantic bull. That's how strong Yahweh is. That's what he's being compared to. It's not a unicorn. It's a kaiju cow. That's why Moses could have had horns, because he, bull. It's symbolic, the same way that a halo or shining would have been symbolic of this divine touch. So that this wouldn't have been a controversial thing. It would have been like, oh my God, he actually touched Yahweh and he's got these horns now, just like the representation. The sin of Aaron wasn't worshiping a golden cow. It was making a visual representation of God. That the golden cows they were like, okay, we're no longer going to use those to represent God. We'd been using those for centuries. We're not going to do that anymore. That was the sin, it wasn't some other deity. That was Yahweh.
That was Yahweh, yeah.
Yeah, or El Elyon, but by that point they were already being merged together. Anyway, back to the whole thing. So, Moses, he does all these things. He gets the glowing face. He goes up onto the angel. His writings are stored in the Ark of the Covenant. He's got this whole scripture. But he also has some flaws. Like he commits this sin and he doesn't get to go into the promised land. And he also wasn't circumcised. And there's a whole scene where Yahweh chases him around camp trying to kill him because he wasn't circumcised. And
you never heard of that?
That's
the way you
that's a
described
scene,
it,
boy.
we're usually taught that it's just like Yahweh was going to kill Moses and his wife on his behalf was like,
The Zipporah scene.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's the point. Jason is I love how Jason elaborates and makes the point. Like Yahweh's coming after him. Like the text implies he's literally coming after him to kill him.
He's trying to kill him.
Yes.
Wow.
And Moses is running from him. And his wife is like, okay, hang on. He's not circumcised. That's why God wants to kill him. I've got an idea. She cuts the foreskin off of their newborn son
God.
and takes the bloody foreskin and wipes it on Moses's foot.
Face? Oh, is it foot? Okay.
Why are you putting
And
it? What's oh?
Because
Whoa!
Foot.
Happy birthday!
Does mine do that? It does not.
in the Old Testament, foot does not mean foot.
Oh.
It's a euphemism.
Yep, it does.
Oh.
So then Yahweh looked down
Well, it can be, yeah.
and was like, oh, wait, okay, you're
Ruth.
circumcised now. You've got blood on your foot. Okay, your foreskin, gotcha. And so then he leaves him alone. So
That is so odd. That is.
it is.
That just,
so
that-
a bloody foreskin got
yikes.
wiped on Moses' dong, and that was enough to fool Yahweh into believing that he had now been circumcised. So then Yahweh's like, okay, you're good. And he walks off and he leaves the camp alone. And Moses is like, whew, at least I didn't have to get circumcised. And so then he goes the rest of his life without ever being circumcised.
Oh my gosh.
And so he's got that going against him.
Can I add some context to help the viewers
Please?
not think this is ridiculous? Because
Well,
I love this.
How is it not ridiculous?
Well, here's my point.
I don't think you
Okay.
can save it.
My point is Jason is touching on something that I'm sure you guys have all come across me pointing out this book.
Yes, you did this
Fabricula.
Yes.
Today.
Yeah, I
Watch your
did.
stream.
Yeah, I had some fun, and that was last minute having Kirkuni. Well, here's some ancient Ugaritic and even other sources that do something
Yes.
that ties in what he was talking about earlier, and then it doesn't get into the circumcision part, but it kind of gives you the idea of what we're dealing with here. One of them is El. So in the mythological stories enshrined on the clay tablets of cosmopolitan Ugarit, around 1350 to 1200 BCE, El's penis makes several appearances. In one myth, the god sets out the serpentine seashore at the edge of the world, where he encounters two young goddesses. They urge him to get an erection. He takes them in body in marriage. Their response is unambiguous. El's penis grew long as the sea. El's penis grew as long as the ocean. These are quotes. Having installed them as brides in his home, he grasps his penis in his right hand and shoots it skyward like an arrow to entice his new wives into consummating the marriage. They are suitably impressed with his masturbatory performance. El stoops to kiss them, relishing the pomegranate sweet taste of their lips. A deliciously sensuous double entendre. Penetrative sex quickly follows. The next quote is from KTU 1.4, and the reference is there. Yahweh is going to Asherah, not Yahweh, El's going to Asherah. And El says to Asherah, does the penis of El king excite you? Does the love organ of the bull arouse you?
Mm-hmm.
He's calling himself a bull. I mean, today we might be like, you dog, you dirty dog. Like, you're calling yourself an animal. And this is like prevalent in the literature that influenced the Bible. So these bulls popping up and there's these weird things going on. And I guess what I'm getting at is we were never told in this descriptive manner that Jason just spent the time describing Moses running for his life from God because he's going to kill him. But we were willing to buy, well, God walked with Adam. Picturing that in our head. Or Abraham in the body of a human, which we try to make Jesus. Abraham debated with God and was saying, 50? What if there's 50 righteous? And by the way, we missed the tone of this. We imagine that this just means, Lord, but what if there are only 50? But what if there are only 45, Lord? No, he's going, God, how can you be righteous? There's 50 righteous men in the city. How dare you go down there and kill it and destroy? He's actually debating with God. We miss all that. We're not really told that kind of perception. And Jews debated with God throughout their entire history. They argued with God. And there even are texts where it says the writings, like the laws, are right. And they're willing to even go against God if necessary to keep the law, to do things right with law. It's pretty wild, the stuff that they would do. Yeah. There's more. I'm not going to go into inky.
But you do kind of see that. You do kind of see that even in Pauline writings where Paul says stuff like, this I say, but not God says. You do see that type of idea where he has this alleged Jewish background where he's willing to stay closer to what he calls the interpretation of the law and outside of what other people may say God says. So that is also very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jason. So I was just going to say, for those who are wondering who Enoch was, he's a guy who disappears, seventh from Adam in the genealogy. He
Walked
walks
with God and then walked no more.
He disappears 365 years, getting back to Jason's point about horns and sun. How many days are in a year, ladies and gentlemen?
365.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's right.
You know, it's these common sense things that me and Jason were like, this is solar. Come on. And so there's this deep-rooted calendar debate going on between lunar and solar, especially in this time period of the late Second Temple period, where the people in the temple are just not practicing these ritual festivals that have been going on way before biblical stuff, by the way. They're just inheriting what we call pagan cultic festivals. They're just inheriting them, putting new stamps on them, new names, new labels, and seasonally, this is similar stuff. And they're saying, no, you guys have altered the course of heaven, which we're supposed to reflect on earth as it is in heaven. We're supposed to mimic the heavens. And they're saying, you have not done so. You have corrupted the order. And anyone who goes back to the oldest myths in Sumeria, anywhere, gods ordained kings to keep order. And the fight between creation, in fact, you go back into the Bible, it's demythologized now, but God is fighting against chaos. In the beginning was darkness and there was no order, and he has to organize. Day one, he separates this. It's all about order. Well, what happens when the cosmos starts to get out of order because the humans aren't keeping it in order with their actions? The end of that cosmology, the end of heaven and earth is going to come. And this is where that whole idea, thanks to you, Jason, with our endless talks for hours, telling me this and going, dude, think about it. These guys were entrenched in this, like, you know, zodiac signs, the whole, you look at on the floor, the synagogues, they're just having a hoot with this mythology and superstition. And anyway, I've said it.
Yeah, there's I can't remember the name of it, but there's one this one little Jewish temple somewhere. I can't remember where, but it has this mosaic of Moses riding a solar chariot through the signs of the zodiac up on the ceiling. That's you know, something right there.
That happened in real history.
Yeah, you can find pictures of it.
There's
high definition images online. You know, you can actually look at photos of this. I can't remember where it is, but you can find it with a Google search pretty easily. But no, these people, like, okay, the first, I think, 5 chapters of Enoch is just them explaining how orderly the creation is supposed to be, you know, and it's like, observe how the rivers all follow their prescribed course and they flow, you know, downhill into the sea, and observe how the sea never transgresses its borders. And basically there's this code, this order to the universe that is established by God, basically commanding it by speaking it. You know, this is the boundary of this particular body of water. This is where this mountain is. This is, you know, how these winds blow, and this is when stars come out, and this is when the flowers and the fruit and everything else. And it's all laid out, and there's 5 chapters of this just saying, this, look how orderly this all is. And then chapter 6 begins, and then there was these bastard angels who screwed it all up, and they transgressed the prescribed order. And then the rest of the book is, look at how much they screwed up.
Wow.
And it's also the fault of those bastards in the Jerusalem temple. And that's the whole book. And there's this one section, it's actually the dead center of Enoch, and it's basically this whole solar calendar, and it's like telling you essentially how to build a solar calendar, or not really a calendar, but a device to be able to look through it and always be able to tell what day of the year it is. And it's very precise in how they describe it, so much so that if you had a chair and a stand and a piece of wood and a marker, you could create this thing in your backyard. Okay. And at any point you could just sit down and look through it whenever the sun comes up and go, oh, it's May 25th. Gotcha. And that's how this thing is. And they go on in this same section to talk about how, because these people in the Second Temple have switched to a lunar calendar, which is like 10 days short each year, their festivals are all at the wrong time. And now these festivals, this wasn't like, hey, you know what? It's it's time for Mardi Gras. Get your tank top and your beads and your booze and go show some skin on Bourbon Street. No, these festivals were meant to not only mark specific days on the calendar, but these things would guarantee a successful harvest. The midwinter festival, the darkest time of the year, is what guaranteed that the sun would come back and it wouldn't just keep getting darker and darker and having shorter and shorter days until all was lost and all was darkness and everyone died. This is what these festivals were for. Yeah. It was to mark these specific times to basically keep nature running. And you had to do them on specific days of the year. And this calendar, this solar calendar they used, would guarantee that. But in the Second Temple period, the Jews in charge of Jerusalem, they had adopted a Babylonian lunar calendar, and that messed everything up. And in Enoch, they're basically saying that this is going to cause the end of the world. You're not doing these renewal festivals on the right time, in the right day. And if you can't do that, you can't repair the damage. Basically, when the Watchers came down and corrupted the world with horrible things like metallurgy and warfare and mascara, it basically just damaged everything. And if you didn't have them, if you didn't have these renewal festivals coming in to fix things, to kind of putty over the cracks, the dam would eventually break. And I mean that literally. They thought the temple was on top of this giant stone that plugged up a fountain beneath Jerusalem. And if this keystone broke, and the only way to keep it structurally sound was to do these specific rituals on very specific days of the year, if you didn't do that by gathering up all the evil in the world and sending it out into the desert and throwing it into a pit and offering a blood sacrifice to a desert demon. If you didn't do that, then this giant stone would shatter, and the Tehom, the chaotic waters of the deep that Yahweh fights in Genesis 1, would burst forth and flood the world. The great dragon Leviathan would come back. And so you had to do this, and the only way to do it was to use a solar calendar. But because they weren't in the temple to do this, and it was being done based on a lunar calendar, that's where you get the prophecy of Daniel, that you had a certain amount of time before the whole thing would just explode and everyone would die. And they thought this was going to happen probably around the third decade of the Common Era. So basically, around the time of Jesus's crucifixion, the whole world was supposed to die.
Oh my God.
Though another one said it could happen about 4 decades after that.
Oh, okay.
So it could either happen when he's crucified or a generation later.
Right.
He would ascend into heaven and then come back around the year 70. And then you'd have
did not age well.
No,
did not age well.
Oh my gosh.
I did have. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead, Derek. Yes, sir.
I just want to make one interesting comment on something that I discovered recently, which I heard a little bit about, but I didn't really know much about. And we've probably all heard apologists make the argument online that God, unlike these other gods who get their hands dirty and all this kind of stuff, like God spoke. God spoke the world into existence, and that no other god did that. You know how they find like a thing where they're like nobody. And I love finding way older, earlier, and I'm not just I could say China has something, but like nobody would bat an eye and go, that's connected. I'm saying connected potentially because Marduk has such a serious connection. For those who don't know, Marduk's a deity, and Assyrians venerated him big time. I mean, this guy was like a deity. And I say, I see, I'm writing my next script and the video's coming out. I see that the guy in the back raises his hand to me, Derek. See, the biblical God is the only deity that by his word, he creates and has power by just speaking. Mm-hmm. And then I found this paper called Word is Power in the Ancient Near East. And this is the quote. It's a little bit long, but I'm not going to read the whole thing. Okay. The Bible no longer stands alone as witness to this concept. In fact, the Old Testament inherited with only slight modifications this dynamistic notion of the efficacious word, applying it according to its own theological needs and within the limits of its orthodoxy. Hypostatization of the divine word, for example, played little or no part in the Old Testament. Whatever may have been its extraordinary development in the New Testament, it seems that at the very beginning, a magical significance was attached to the word in the ancient world. Pronounced under the right circumstances, this word was thought to have irresistible power for good or evil. Studies in comparative religion provide countless examples of the word conceived as a magical power by which men could gain some control over their precarious environment. The spells, rituals, and execrations were so many techniques by which results were achieved. We who make an essential distinction between an action and a formula, rite or symbolic act, find it hard to understand the mentality of people for whom such distinctions had little or no meaning, since symbol, as we've been talking about, symbol and reality coalesced. When the gods of Mesopotamia had conferred kingship upon one of their number, Marduk, they wanted assurance that Marduk's word really had that magical power which brought results. They devised a test, and here's the quote. They placed a garment in their midst and said to Marduk, their firstborn, O Lord, thy lot is truly highest among the gods. Command annihilation and existence, and may both come true. May thy spoken word destroy the garment, then speak again, and may it be intact. He spoke, and at his word the garment was destroyed. He spoke again, the garment reappeared. The gods, his fathers, seeing the power of his word, rejoiced, paid homage. Marduk is king. I mean, I have several sources here, even older Sumerian stuff. The point is, God's doing magic in Genesis freaking 1, dude.
Yep.
I mean,
which I might add, Genesis chapter 1 is it actually comes from a Babylonian creation epic called the Enuma Elish, which is the first line, which means win on high. And it's about these big chaos dragons that kind of run the show, and the gods are trying to get rid of them, and none of them can. And this young upstart warrior deity named Marduk is like, I tell you what if I do this? I'll get rid of these chaos monsters, and if I can, I get to sit on the highest throne.
Yep.
And they're like, whatever. I guess we'll go ahead and make that deal. And they're like, he's gonna get eaten.
He's not gonna make it. Yeah.
And he goes and he fights the big chaos dragon, and he wins. He also kind of dies in the process, but he comes back to life, and then he takes this dragon and he cuts it in half. And he takes half of it, and he uses it to make the firmament.
Oh, okay.
And this is the separation of the waters, and you get half the water up in heaven and half the water down on the earth. That's how dry land emerges. It allows them to do all the rest of creation, and it also explains where rain comes from and why the sky is blue.
Yeah, they think
that's what Genesis 1 is. It's a retelling of that, only instead of him going over there with a spear, he goes and he does it all just by speaking it, because it's one-upmanship. Oh, yeah. Your God can kill a dragon with a spear. Mine can slay it with a word.
Right.
Yours has to go and construct this. Mine just says it, and it happens. Mm-hmm. They're taking this idea that already existed with Marduk.
Yep.
And they're just they're improving on it. They're making it better. It's my dad can beat up your dad.
That's it.
They even take it further, and they're like, you know what? And you see this in Job. They're like, so Leviathan, the thing that in our oldest stories, ate Yahweh, and he probably died, and he was resurrected 3 days later. And he actually, Leviathan was actually created later by Yahweh. It didn't exist before him. And that's part of the Genesis 1 account. Leviathan he's just like another creature. The dragons are just creatures that he makes. And according to Job, he does it so he'll have a wrestling partner. He made him for sport. And so he can go and do some tournament fishing. He can throw a line in there and hook him and drag him out. And that's the whole purpose. So it goes from this pre-existent monster that's older than Yahweh and can fight him to just something he made so he can have fun with. And so they're demoting all these things, just like they demote all the other gods and either turn them into angels or demons. Like all these other gods in the Old Testament, all these like demons and stuff, they were gods. They were Yahweh's brothers and sisters. Or
Absolutely.
His wife. That's where they all came from.
Hey, Elisa in the thing says wrestling partner. Okay, Yahweh. What's interesting is oh no, for real though, Jacob actually wrestled Yahweh.
That's right.
Right.
That's
and
right.
That's a whole nother freaking.
And then Yahweh
started.
And then Yahweh punched him in the junk, and Jacob still won.
That's right.
Yeah.
Can you?
But I mean, isn't that?
Oh, please, Darante.
No, the only thing I was just going to say is, doesn't that kind of show how this whole story is ultimately a metaphor for humanity wrestling with entropy, wrestling against the chaos of the world, and then just trying to find or rationalize an origin for that
I think
entropy
so.
that we're dealing with.
I think it's just trying to explain, and there are several factors I'm sure that isn't included in that, but you're absolutely, it's the best guess they had and how they figure it out, how to make sense of it with a long-standing tradition being passed to them. Yeah. But I just want to make one comment that I think me and Jason share the same philosophy. How often are atheists online just bashing the Bible and are like, screw that book, we don't care about anything for it, and we get why, and we're not discrediting that. I think we're trying to ignite a passion, though, for those who are secular, agnostic, theists that aren't fundamentalists, just pretty much anyone who's not a fundamentalist. Mm-hmm. We're trying to ignite a passion to make you realize, let's approach this secular. Like, we do not need to come at this faith-based, and you can actually go, damn, this book's full of crazy stuff. This is like, some of it's really ugly, but we wouldn't bat an eye when we hear about Europa being raped by Zeus, and then you see art of a bull. By the way, Zeus is in the art of a bull. He is a bull in the image with Europa on his back. He's actually transformed into a bull. He just raped her, and he made her his. Like, we would know that's bad, but we go, these are interesting stories. Why we need to put the Bible into that category and not just let believers monopolize the book, because that's what we're trying to do.
That's right.
Yeah.
I absolutely
I will push back on one thing, Derek.
Go ahead.
I will gladly include the fundamentalist. You should see my inbox. I've got some young Earth creationists, and I've got one that I've been going back and forth with for a couple years now, who is a regular listener to my show.
Wow.
Who,
I'm not saying not to have fundamentalists. I'm saying, look, typically, as you know, they're not interested. They actually just want to attack. And I'm not saying all. I'm simply saying, like, you can't. When I use the term fundamentalist, let me just define it this way: someone who's not in that mode, willing to actually listen and learn. That's all I mean by it.
They're not there for a conversation.
Exactly.
They're there to proselytize.
Yeah, I'm glad you pushed back, though. I'm glad you did that.
Yeah. And I believe me, I understand what you're saying. But yeah, I found out recently that one of the young Earth creationists that I have, who's a regular listener to my show, which I have a few YEC listeners, but one of them works at Ken Ham's Ark Park.
Shut
No.
I have one on the hook who works at the Ark Park, which needs to get turned into a paintball field. That would be amazing.
That would be so awesome.
I would light up a dinosaur. I'm sorry.
A board park, a skateboard park. That would be so awesome.
That too. It's big. It's big enough for every animal on Earth. It's big enough to have like laser tag and everything, man. You could have a bar.
That's my type of
you
language.
could have all kind of stuff, man.
Some of your listeners are like the people that you have told me about that listen to your podcast. That's incredible. And Derek, I'm sure you have some stories too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like
we both do.
It's incredible. Yeah. It's just, the people that
that's why if we could organize renting out that ark for as a private organization, for our own purposes.
I doubt it.
Eventually it's going to go bankrupt. It's only a matter of time.
I wouldn't even fund it because that would be funded.
That is true. You know what I mean? That is true. Absolutely.
But no, that's
we
why
filmed an orgy in it, then we can just defile the whole thing.
Hey,
you're onto something.
Worse ideas have been suggested.
Right?
Who's riding the dinosaur, Daddy? Anyway, sorry, I'm giving you ideas already.
They've got a Triceratops with a saddle, but I think that's at the Creation Museum.
Snap! That's intimidating.
That's why I take such a gentle approach, and I don't actually talk about religion on my show, because I'm just talking about the stories.
Yeah,
and like so many believers come to my show to learn more, even after they find out that I'm not a believer. They're still like, man, you've got, this is a good source of information. It's a great place to start. And I think a lot of atheists do the whole, not just the atheist community, but society in general, a huge disservice by just openly bashing religion and the Bible. When you openly attack someone's core beliefs,
they double down.
You do not make headway. You do the opposite.
Yep.
They become more rooted in their beliefs. They put up walls. They actually become more conservative. They become more resistant to new ideas.
Yep.
But if you just sit down and have a casual conversation, you can have a casual conversation about these topics with almost anyone, including, and I say this from experience on 2 occasions, including people who have sent you death threats.
Yes.
You can have a civilized conversation with someone who has threatened to kill you.
Wow.
Yep.
It can happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if
the amount of headway you're going to get, And look, I'm not saying someone's threatening to kill you. You should go and hang out with them.
Don't do that.
No,
not face to face.
Do not.
Right.
But, when you've got a 50-year-old Calvinist in Arizona, whose primary concern is feeding her cats.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly worried about her.
Right.
Right.
But twice I've received 2 death threats from my podcast, and I've had successful, civilized, ongoing conversations with both of those people.
Wow.
And some of my best conversations.
To you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Some of my best conversations are with young Earth creationists. I have exhilarating conversations with these people, and they're very intellectual and passionate conversations from 2 people who fundamentally disagree and do not get angry at any point.
Yeah.
And that is not possible if you start from the Bible is bullshit. That is not possible.
Yeah.
You will never deconvert a person by saying you're full of crap.
Right.
No.
And you're an idiot for believing that.
Yeah.
And we need to realize that these aren't people who are stupid.
Right.
These are people who were led to believe something from the time that they were old enough to listen.
Yeah.
For their entire lives is what they've been surrounded with. And most of them just don't know any better. Yeah. And they've never been presented with any good information, not from their peers, not from the pulpit, not from their parents,
Go ahead,
not
Stacey.
from anyone.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, we've all been in that situation. Like we were all
such were we.
There.
Yeah, I was one of them.
I was just going to say, I literally was going to say something to that effect and just add that I said this the other day to one of my buddies on the phone. I said, if I knew this material, what I know now back then, it would have
Yes.
saved me a lot of time
Yep.
on being where I'm at today. But there is a sense which you go full on skeptic, because once you've been deceived on that level, and they're not being truthful and more realistic and saying, look, we have these beliefs, these may not have happened, there's truth in the story, you know, this kind of stuff. Once you have a bubble pop like that, then you really question, did any of this stuff happen? Exactly. And that's what leads you down this skeptical and usually chip on your shoulder antagonism. And then eventually, because then you have those apologists who are also being antagonistic. It just, you're right, Jason. I think that if we just give them the evidence, give them the insights, help take them through seeing how these connect, maybe their eyes will open and they'll go, whoa, why wasn't I told this? Who's hiding this?
Yeah.
You know?
And
I often like to, you can go ahead, Stacey.
No, please, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I like to remind people that sometimes, and it's hard to reconcile, but certain people's irrationalities are absolutely rational when you consider the sociological environments that they have been a part of. And so it's a very difficult balance, a line to walk at times. But at least that's how they see it in their minds. This is absolutely rational, and you have to kind of be gracious towards that, because that's not a minority. That is the majority of our species. I think we have to kind of understand that critical thinking has evolved as we have kind of aged and got to see more in things, but we are still a fairly young species. And so a lot of the things that we see in ourselves, and I have to remind myself of this because I kind of go hard in the paint in the comments sometimes, but I have to remind myself that, you know, hey, these things no longer seem feasible or appropriate to you. But for many of these people, because they've not stepped outside yet, this is 100% rational to them. And so, you know, the only thing you can do is to create an atmosphere for them that will eventually make them safe enough to have a conversation with you. Now, I'm not always friendly with it, and I don't make that guarantee. But the good news is I've had plenty of people who I've had like knockout dragouts with in the comments to come back to me in my private messenger and be like, hey, I'm rethinking a lot of the stuff I've said now. And it's because people, bottom line, people need that safe environment, whether it's conflict free or conflict full, to actually hear themselves think these things out loud. And they don't really get that a lot.
Yeah. And a couple other things we have to remember is that, one, I'm not saying that people, that atheists are not justified in being angry. Your anger is, I mean, it's a natural response to realizing that, you know, you've wasted decades of your life on what amounts to nonsense and mythology. But we have to remember that, you know, I don't know of a single athist who left their religion because someone yelled at him. Like that.
Right.
Did Neil interview anyone who was like, yeah, someone called me a moron, and I was like, oh yeah,
that'll do it.
No,
that's
right. That does not happen.
That's true.
We are not a rational creature. Our brains are not wired for rational thought. It takes training and a constant conscious effort to do that. We are made to make sudden instinctual leaps of logic, and logic. There's air quotes around logic there. We are to make all sorts of drastic assumptions because doing so is beneficial to survival. You know, if you hear something in the grass and you assume it's a tiger, you are more likely to survive than if you ignore it and assume it's the wind. And that is at the heart of our thinking. Okay, that's who we are. And when you compound that with, you know, an education system that is only marginally better than third world countries. This has been demonstrated that's where we are in the U.S. And a culture that frowns upon, you know, higher learning, critical thinking, and anything secular. I mean, we literally have politicians saying someone should stand up to scientists, you know. Like, that's where we are, the stupidity is praised.
Nerd.
And this is where, exactly. And this is where this is what people are raised in.
Mhm.
And this is where a great many of us came from,
Yeah.
and so I think that anytime we're engaging with someone who's religious, we should take a moment to consider that. We were once in that exact spot,
Yeah.
and they come from a religion that preaches, at its core, is centered around the idea that any message against that religion is not only a personal attack, but one that
Yes.
comes from the author of evil himself.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's a very difficult thing to work with and to work around. And yelling at people is not going to help in any way, shape, or form. Some people you're not going to be able to reach, just ignore them. But if you want to have a conversation,
Yeah.
be gentle, be kind, be understanding.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And weigh
love
your
that.
words before you speak, because 90% of what you want to say is not constructive.
Yep. And if, for those of you who are watching this, if you think you're going to get that from me, from my comments, guess again. But if you message me, you'll definitely get that. I am a savage in the comments, but if you message me, you're always going to get human. Because
There
I
you
consider that more good faith. You come at me in my comments, I'm going for the jugular every time. But
I love it. I like the way this kind of took a turn. It was
This was beautiful. This was beautiful.
It was really nice. I just wanted to say thanks to Eyes Opening Heart Aligning for her super chat. She's in Scotland and she stayed up to watch this, and she had to go to bed, but she sent a little super chat thanking us for the show. So I know we need
I know how to bring it back. I know how to bring it around full circle.
Okay, sure. Do it.
Just as we should show some understanding toward the people who are still religious. It's the same way that Enoch argued for mercy against the Watchers, because even some of them were redeemed.
That's right. I love it.
Ding, ding,
Chaos
ding.
Dragons.
Wow.
Chaos Dragons for everyone.
Well done,
Right.
Jason. Thank you. Oh, this was great. I always love chatting with you guys. This was fun.
Yes.
Same.
This was amazing.
These are fun.
Thank you. So I just wanted to do a couple quick little things before we wrap up. I just wanted to thank our patrons. Helen, Greene, Logan Fisher, Amanda McLeod, Eric Ozols, Rion, D. Murphy, Dandy, Michael Wiseman, Cindy Plaza, Sunny Shell, Aaron Coalson, and Phil Calderone. If you'd like to become a patron, you can go to patreon.com/skeptichaven. Also, we are looking for volunteers for producing, booking, and call screening. If you are interested, please contact us at the email you see below, wesdsturdevant@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out our other shows on Skeptic Haven. Tuesdays, as you see here, we have Secular Soapbox. Thursdays is The Sunny Spot. Saturday, The Global Atheists and Women Atheists Unload. And then on Sunday nights, we have Let's Talk. Yes, that's our call-in show. So thank you to everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to all of us. We all have channels and shows and all that great stuff. And I just wanted to really quickly mention this Saturday, over on the line is the big Recovering from Religion fundraiser. It's going to be all day, and you will see me there at some point. So don't forget to check that out. I think that's everything. If anyone else has anything else they'd like to say, thank you so much for being here, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yes, and
This
one
was
more
awesome.
super chat just came in from Adventure Chick. So thank you for the $1 super chat.
She's the best.
Right?
Yeah, I don't think I've seen Adventure Chick before. So thank you for being here.
I
love
think
seeing
I've
you
seen
people.
her. She's about 30 feet away from me.
Oh,
Yeah. She's directly that way.
Aw.
How serendipitous. I love it.
That's
I
awesome.
love it.
Yeah, she is my first listener, and for
Okay.
a while she was my only listener.
That's how it
Aw.
goes. That's how it goes. I have one of those too.
I saw your lovely wife in the chat, Darante. I honestly love when partners are in the chat and it's like, oh, so
Yay.
sweet. So
I do have an idea that I want to do at some point, and that is just get a coffee and talk with my partner and like go into. There's so much we could talk about because she is into some of this stuff, while most of this stuff, no. But the real implications and the social life stuff, like she can get really into that, like you do, Stacy. Like, so I do want to start doing something like that with her and putting the cameras on, because there's so much.
Yeah.
I imagine the world really wants to be a fly on the wall and hearing these kind of conversations happen. So
absolutely.
Well, can I say just how valuable that is? That there are people out there who are trying to figure out how to do relationships after faith. You know, outside of purity culture and outside of this, don't be unequally yoked. People do need to see couples on this side of things and what that can look like, if for nothing else, just for permission to explore new ideas for their relational realities. Because I know for me, on the other side of thing, marriage was really just about the legal right to have sex. It was nothing more than that, you know? And so on this side of it, it's like, holy crap, I have a partner. I have a whole nother adult that I can do life with. And I think people need to see that. And so that's an incredible idea, Derek.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great idea. Do it. Do it.
I'm going to do it. Well, I got to persuade her, but it'll happen. It'll happen. I'm sure.
I know you do. I still want to do a show with you and her and me. And
I know. We got to make that happen. We will.
I know. We keep talking about it. It's been forever. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you all next time. And you guys are all great. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.